Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Wednesday webinar with Hire. My name is Kelly McGrath-Smith, for anyone who might be new to us. I'm the Community Director at Hire, so you're very, very welcome. If you are maybe new to Hire, maybe you're not part of the community, I'll give you a little bit of an overview of who we are. So we are a global community of internal talent and HR folk. We've got over 10,000 members at the moment and growing, which is absolutely amazing. And we kind of like to see ourselves as the hive mind of global TA. So really united on a mission to up-level the industry. And part of that mission is hosting these weekly webinars where we speak to members of the community, experts in the industry on some really, really interesting topics. So we're really, really looking forward to this one. As you join, drop us a note, let us know maybe where in the world you're joining from. It's always lovely to hear and see where our international audience is coming from. And if you're not a member of Hire, I'll just pop the link below just so you can pop that into your browser if you fancy checking us out and joining us. And today's webinar topic, we're really going to be exploring leadership versus management. So what are the markers of a great leader in TA, how to inspire a team, and really just kind of getting underneath the surface of this topic. So I've got some fantastic people joining me. It won't just be me talking, thankfully. So I will hand over to our lovely panelists to introduce themselves before we crack on with the topic. So Sean, I'll go to yourself first.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Sean Shelley. I lead talent at Amperity. Amperity is a customer data platform where we unify customers' identities for companies so they can be really successful in figuring out who their customers are and marketing to them. Before Amperity, I've spent years at Apple, 17 years, where I was part of the launch team for the retail stores and kind of led that globally, part of that growth story, as well as T-Mobile, preparing them for the merger with Sprint. So recruiting is something I love, and this topic today is actually something that's really near and dear to my heart for lots of reasons. So happy to be here. Thank you.
Oh, amazing. Great to have you. And Abby, I will hand over to yourself next to introduce yourself.
Perfect. So my name is Abigail. I'm a talent director at Talentful. I'm actually located just outside of Seattle in a small town of about 900 people. I started my background in the bullpen agency style where you were dialing for dollars. So I did that for several years. Wanted to know, I knew a lot about talent acquisition and how much money companies spent on talent acquisition. And I wanted to know more about talent management. So then I transitioned to talent management work. I've been in the RPO model for about 5-6 years now. And currently I'm working with clients that are struggling with delivery goals. Maybe teams are really far behind on achieving targets. And I come in with a plan and a manager and a team of recruiters, and we come in and turn them around. So.
Amazing. Thank you. And then last but not least, Cody.
Absolutely. So I'm Cody Schroetel. I lead the talent acquisition function here at Calibra. We're the leaders in the data intelligence category, basically building a platform and system of record for chief data officers to build and run their business, but similarly a kind of one-stop shop for all data consumers and with an enterprise to go to as well. My background is executive search. So I cut my teeth doing C-level and VP level searches for the venture community. Did that for about 5 years with a firm called Diversa Partners. And actually Calibra was my client. So I got a chance to work with Calibra before I worked at Calibra. Absolutely fell in love with the business, absolutely fell in love with the culture, the vision, and had the opportunity to join in 2017. We were about 150 people leading TA. Fast forward to today, that's grown to just north of 1,100. So it's been a fantastic journey as we've built that in the last couple of years.
Oh, amazing. Oh, it's brilliant to have you all here. And for anyone who's tuning in, we'll have a bit of a Q&A at the end, but we love participation, we love engagement. So please do, if you've got a burning question as we're running through our topic, or there's anything you want to comment, do just put it in the chat and we'll be able to see it as well. But let's dive straight into it. And I guess the first part of the conversation, we'll kind of talk more around that kind of leadership versus management piece and the key differences. So maybe just to start with, let's kind of talk about like what distinguishes leadership from management. Sean, if you'd like to kick us off.
So it's a pretty binary question, and and I think that today's world requires us to pivot back and forth. But I think I'll give my answer to the statement of what your question really is. I think managers per se typically have the need to plan, organize, coordinate, and they're kind of like mobilizing resources, particularly if you're thinking about the work that we're involved with, talent, recruiting, and so forth. Leading, just by nature of leading, you're building followership, and so you're inspiring, you're motivating, you're influencing those around you, both your team, your candidates, and obviously then the organization when you're thinking of sort of building that longer term vision. It's a hard pivot, I think, in today's world where sometimes people are dealing with resource constraints, but I think great leaders have figured out how to deal with the things that you have to manage, but you're doing it in a way where you're building sort of belief that you can go do these things in a really sort of in a powerful, long-term, sustainable way. So that's sort of my belief.
Yeah, amazing. And Abby, how about you? Anything to add to that one?
I'd say definitely very similar. I think that the largest difference, or the most vast difference, would be the flexing. I think is where it gets fuzzy. So leaders, I think you're more of the visionary, right? You don't have to be in a leadership role. You don't have to be directly someone's manager to be leading them, right? It's like that influence that you have over the vision. I think as leaders, we question a lot more. We can have some of those really tough conversations where we can butt heads, where we can question things and directions. Whereas more of our managers, I feel like they are the ones more executing those visions and those goals, and they're able to set out, and they're in the day-to-day, and they're really grinding and helping us execute. Without really great managers, we can't be really great leaders.
I love that piece. And Cody, how about your thoughts on this one?
This is one that I think we're all going to agree on. I think everyone said it pretty well. A manager, we've built out our manager and kind of leadership profiles, and the basis of it is a manager goes deep. They focus on tactics and execution. They have more of a short-term focus. So it's, near term, how do we get these things done? And then it's a cross-team network. And by cross-team, I mean mostly within that function. How do we kind of leverage the other functions to partner? Where a leader takes a bit of a broader perspective. Sean, to your point, also, the longer term view, you're building that vision and that strategy. And it's oftentimes kind of cross enterprise work. I think the, interesting thing though is, a leader at the end of the day is inspiring. You're kind of demonstrating expertise, you're demonstrating confidence, you're inspiring, you're motivating, and you're influencing. And when I think about it a little bit, I also think there's a natural kind of segue from talent acquisition oftentimes into leadership, because if you think about what a recruiter is doing on a day-to-day basis, you're telling a story. And sometimes you're selling that story, but whether it's to a candidate or a hiring manager, you're persuading. And I think if you can harness some of that persuasion and take more of a team-centric view than an opportunity or a candidate, a lot of those skills actually transfer really well, so long that you kind of master that art of storytelling.
Absolutely. And that kind of brings us nicely into our next point, kind of around that transition. I think this is something that we also spoke about kind of in our briefing call last week around, that piece where you might go from being the same level as your peers, and then all of a sudden you're managing friends, you're managing people that maybe you were in the same role with, or all of a sudden you've just transitioned, into that kind of first real leadership position. And I guess, look, we'll all have kind of different experience here, but is there anyone who'd like to lead this, maybe in that piece around all of a sudden you have been managing your peers and your friends?
I was waiting for Cody to chime in there. I actually have been in this situation a couple of times. Most recently is my current position. My manager right now is someone that used to be a colleague of mine. I think that, and also we were friends. When you're colleagues with someone, you get to know people really well. We traveled together. We're going to San Francisco and New York, meeting our teams and building them together. And then I was also in this position previously in my career as well. But I think it is really important to set expectations pretty early on what that relationship needs to look like. Also ask, what is your vision for this group? What do you want this to look like in the future? Almost like that managing upward or down, depending on what you're doing. It can create some tension points for sure, but I think it does, at the end of the day, it does create a better solution, I think, because you do bump heads and you are able to have a little bit tougher conversations as well. It's really important to level set in the beginning.
Yeah, I think the beauty of some of that is, assuming, you kind of mentioned, Kelly, peers or friends, and assuming you've had some friendships there, it may also imply that you've got some trust, which, inevitably there will be some hard conversations that you have to have. But if you have that mutual trust as a foundation, and that person or those folks know that your intentions are in the right place and it's on the betterment of the team and the success of everyone, it makes it that much easier to have some of those hard conversations. Abby, I love what you said about managing expectations. I think that's such a big thing throughout all of this. And at some point in time, you kind of have to draw a line and you have to remove yourself from the person that you used to be to kind of step into and force yourself into that leadership role. And it's strange at first. It's kind of awkward, but it's for everyone's game.
So I think what's interesting is this topic is not unique to TA at all. It happens in every line of business where somebody gets promoted at some point in time. I think what's interesting about, so the TA, is sort of like the sales side of HR, right? We're out there, we're telling a story, we're selling, we're trying to bring someone into the company. We're dating them, and sometimes we're breaking up with them because they're the wrong person for us. It's complicated. And, your best salesperson, your best recruiter is not always a great leader. Sometimes they're really bad at managing. In fact, a lot of recruiters are terrible at process. And so I think what's interesting about this transition piece is a great leader wasn't necessarily the best recruiter. And so sometimes it's difficult for people around you to understand, why were they selected? Because I'm killing it. And so I think the tenets of a great leader in the first place, and it connects to that transition piece, is if you lead with your heart in the role that you're in before you're in this big seat, and people understand your authenticity, your honesty, your care, you're wanting everyone to win, those are the tenets that people tend to will follow you, rather than if you were the one that was filling the most recs and all those sorts of things that are sort of tickets to admission if you were looking at a data grid. And so, we've done this recently. We've promoted somebody within our team, and everybody kind of viewed that individual as sitting in the seat already. Like it was kind of a bit of we'll call it a no-brainer because they were there. And so there's something that I'll end really quickly with this is I believe everybody leads. Like it doesn't matter if you're in a coordinator role, you're a CEO, like you're leading something all the time. Sports teams, the person that's in the clubhouse might be leading. They're not the star player. And so like, how do you lead from the role that you're in? And people will follow you kind of if you're a caring individual and humble. And so when you make that transition, you're not having to kind of prove the point that I deserve it. Nobody wants you to read the resume every day, So, but the transition, you have to have intention for sure.
Absolutely. And I love that piece actually around, you can be a great leader and not necessarily be a manager, for example. And I think sometimes in recruitment, particularly if you look at kind of, our agency days, it tends to be the top billers all of a sudden become leaders of the team and managers. And actually they may just not want that role and be great, individual contributors, but there's someone else on the team who's not the top biller, but they're a fantastic manager in terms of their leadership skills. And I guess in terms of that kind of initial kind of transition or that step up to, kind of being that leader, like what do you think are some of, and you kind of touched upon it there in terms of it can be a different level, but what do you think are some of the markers of someone who holds the capabilities to actually be a great leader?
I'll start. So, I think recruiters love to talk, but frankly, I think a strength of a great recruiter is being a listener. And, there's a reason we have two of these and one of these. And leaders, I think when you're going through that transition, you have to listen a lot. It's sort of like when you hire someone from the outside, somebody wants to come and they want to make all this change. And it oftentimes in exec recruiting, Cody, you've seen this, where you hire someone with great capability to come in and they're not successful because they actually didn't understand what the problem or what they were being solved, bringing to solve. When you're hiring internally, promoting internally, you really have to listen and understand, maybe the challenges the team has, what things they think needs to change, what's working that you don't need to fix because it wasn't broken in the first place. So I think being a listener, because you're showing humility, you're showing listening, you're showing partnership. And I think that builds a lot of credibility and trust, with the team. I say that out of a lot of mistakes that I've made particularly when I was younger. When you've seen the movie a couple of times, you start to understand, what the plot can thicken, how it thickens. But I think that's the biggest one. You don't need to kind of prove out your expertise. You were put in the job for a reason. And spending that time with the team to listen and learn matters.
I think there's a quote around that, and I wish I could remember exactly what it was, but it's something about like a good leader makes you feel good about yourself, isn't convincing you that you're good that they're good at their job. It's like something along those lines, which I try and think about too, is it's like you're trying to bring that person up, where in reality that person's bringing you up. It's like this weird mix because you care genuinely about their background. So I think that as a leader, that person is helping. That's like a weird quality to say.
The other side of that same coin, Sean, you talk about listening. We'll often just referencing it as like seeking to understand, right? You don't have all the answers. And I think leading with the fact that you don't have all the answers and that kind of vulnerability, but that honesty helps folks understand that they play a role in the thing too. It's not just a leader's job. It's actually the job of the team. And by admitting that, you don't have all the answers and you're coming to your experts, whether you're in a new role or, the same role that's evolved over time, brings them along for the journey and by default puts them in a position where they play a role as well. And in my opinion, kind of all tides rise together in that scenario.
Yeah.
And that's a good point, I think, around, you mentioned kind of vulnerability there. And I think vulnerability in leadership is a topic that, could have its own webinar, to be honest. But I'd love to maybe get your thoughts on, the benefits, if you think it is a benefit of actually showing vulnerability in leadership and what that can do. And of course, if anyone disagrees, please absolutely chime in as well. But yeah, I'd love to get your thoughts on kind of showing vulnerability as a leader. Sean, I'll go to you in the corner of my screen there.
Yeah, cool. So can I tell a little story?
Yes, please.
Good, because I'm going to. I'm a Canadian, moved to the US a long time ago, and my first manager I was in retail. He had been a fighter pilot in Vietnam. I wouldn't say he showed a lot of vulnerability. I learned a lot from him, but I learned a lot of things that were probably not great traits for me to emulate. So I'll kind of park that. He was actually very supportive of me in my career, right? And then I get this other individual who was the antithesis, who has been, if anybody knows me, her name's Denise, and she's been a really powerful force in my life for the past 25 years. A very close friend of mine still, and I reported directly into her for 17 years. Denise leads with her heart. She's decisive. But she's also very open to sharing with a trusted group the things that actually cause her to have highs and lows, why she's leading, what she's thinking, talks about the stuff she doesn't know, and is really okay with that. She does not need to be the smartest person in the room, even though that she is, because she's really able to pull people into different meetings. And when we have exec meetings, at former company, she would pull the right person in regardless of level because they're the right person to be in the room. And that type of vulnerability, I will tell you, people would fall on the sword for her. I think that they would walk on coals because they trust her and they know that she's got their back. And I hope that there's some things that I've been able to take and glean and do as a result of that. But to me, that's the type of leadership, particularly in our space, because HR and TA is not, you don't get thanked a lot. If you hire someone great, the business did. If you hired someone bad, you did, right? And so to have a leader that you know is going to be there with you along the journey, it really matters to me.
Mm. And Abby, how about you in terms of, I guess, that vulnerability and leadership piece?
I think it brings us back to like the authenticity. I think being an authentic leader is what resonates. It's always worked for me. And being vulnerable just fits into the way that I lead, and I've been led in the past. I know there are other individuals like Sean. I used to work with some Navy SEALs and some folks in the skydiving industry that were the opposite of fluffy and the opposite of politically correct in the work environment currently. So I think I saw both sides of it, extremes, and then I decided I wanted to be somewhere in the middle. And so I think living from those failures and those successes and being authentic to yourself. If you are genuinely, vulnerable and this is how you lead your life, I think that that's the way you want to lead in your work life. Being someone you are in your personal life and your professional life, and that cohesiveness makes your life so much simpler.
Yeah, I think I'll add to that. The secret that comes with being vulnerable is people get to know the person behind the leader, and it just allows you to be human. I think, so many times, whether it's your direct reports or a few layers down, whatever it may be, there's just that kind of perception of, oh, this person's more senior, the hierarchy. It's just kind of naturally built in. And that vulnerability allows you to kind of show your true self and just be as human as possible, which I think makes you that much more relatable, makes it that much more easy if you need to dig in and dive into the weeds or partner with somebody on something and pick things up. It just makes it much more approachable for everybody. So, outside of maybe underserving or underselling yourself, I don't really think there's much to lose from being vulnerable.
Yeah.
If people know your true intentions, like, oh, Abby would never say something that would deliberately be hurtful. She's saying this out of a place of constructive, she's saying this to help. And I think that goes a long way. Like what Cody said, the trust. If you have that trust with your team, being vulnerable is definitely key.
And I guess if we're looking at that piece around kind of motivation and trust, one of, I guess, the struggles that people can face in leadership roles, be it a role that they have, stepped into in their current organization or one that they've stepped into in a new organization, is maybe underperforming teams or a team that is just struggling to meet targets. And, coming into that place, how as leaders can you start to, rejuvenate and get that motivation from, a team that's new to you? Because I think that's something that a lot of leaders do experience at some point in their life. Abby, I'll hand this one to you because I know this is something that we spoke about quite a bit as well in our briefing call with you.
Yeah, it seems I've found myself in a niche in my current role where I typically am asked to step into accounts that are underperforming, under-delivering. We're on the verge of not delivering on target. It can be really, really challenging and really difficult because you're balancing a lot. So if I'm working with, Cody, for example, I'm like balancing Cody's internal team, in-house team function with my team, who is technically external, but we sit on site. So we operate the same as an internal capacity. It can be very delicate because there's a lot of feelings and there's a lot of expectations around what that partnership should look like. So again, we're back to expectation setting. So I think coming in with that to that team and having to have realistic conversations about what it looks like and kind of get away from the fluff to say, this is what we really peel back to what we actually need to do. Look at the data, looking at all of these different pieces. Being real with them in every capacity has helped me or my team leaders bring that team to delivery target. One, for example, we were working with a company called Moxian recently, and one of my leads was in a pretty rough place in the beginning, and she stepped up and just had to have very real conversations with everyone on the team, be very direct, which is very uncomfortable, I think, for my particular lead to have direct conversations. Hey, we're not hitting target, the biggest piece was trying to bring them along on that story, right? This is where we were at. This is where we need to be. This is what it needs to look like to get there. And how are we going to get there? So I definitely advised her in bringing that story along to bring them along as well.
Just kind of piggybacking off of that, one of our values at Calibra is open, direct, and kind. And it is, I think, just one of my favorite values because you have to have the trifecta. You can't have 2 out of the 3. If you're open and direct, but you don't have that kindness in the message that you're delivering, Abby, it kind of comes back to what you're saying, the intention, the impact of what you're saying. Like at the end of the day, people are human and they need to understand that, there's a human element of it, and you can deliver what might be hard news in an easy to consume way. If you're open and kind, but you're not direct, you're not actually giving them what they need to do the job, and you're not actually setting themselves up for success. And you could argue that that's not, kind in of itself either. And so I think as you're going through those difficult conversations, a value such as open, direct, and kind, and other companies have other values that I'm sure they can lean on in these situations as well, really help you get to the kind of crux of some of those hard conversations, assuming that you've kind of already done what we've previously been talking about, which is listening, seeking to understand. You can't come in having all the answers right away.
So a couple things come to mind. One is the performance piece that we're talking about, which I want to briefly address. But we also got, a really challenging current market with the state of the industry that we're in recruiting as well, where you have a lot of demotivation and fear about kind of what's going on in, around, which I like to touch on. Maybe we can talk about that a little bit later. So in my past, I was in a builder mode and opened a lot of countries. And you like to say that you've got a repeatable motion that you've developed, and you've kind of got this kit of parts. You go in and you do things the same. And the reality is that in theory that works operationally, but when you go to bring that out into certain places where you've got nuances, culture, and so forth, it doesn't necessarily translate. Both because of working styles, maybe the industry that you're in, the desire of the brand, or whatever. And Germany was one of those countries for us, where I had probably the most talented team that was failing miserably. And what's interesting is that I had one of my most trusted people that worked for me for many years that I put in charge of that team, and like nothing was working. And we had to get down and go into the details, and it kind of goes back to what you asked about earlier, this manager leadership thing. Like I was living at 30,000 feet with hundreds of people that were in my organization, and I was having to do an offsite with 5 people and dig into like what's happening here. And I felt like I was over managing, but I was actually doing the things that they needed me to do. Today, like fast forward a number of years, those folks still, they don't work for me anymore. I'm at a different company. But many of them, we have a really close relationship still. Some of them have started their own agencies. Other ones are leading talent. All of them are in leadership roles at other companies because of the things that we were able to uncover to figure out what's happening here. And part of that was we had to also sit down with the business and kind of rebuild some expectations. The reality is the things that they had thought were going to work in the UK weren't translating. And we had to, and I had to, as a leader, be able to say, like, here's going to be the new normal for this part of our organization, and we need to think differently about this because it's not a rinse and repeat motion based upon, structure, style, in this case, working councils, and on and on and on. But without getting into that level of detail, which frankly, I don't love to live in that level of detail, we wouldn't have been able to come up with a successful model, which ultimately the business needed, which was we need these businesses to come out and be wildly successful. And today they are. So that matters. But, the other piece too is I would just say that, demotivation happens. We've all had egg on our face a couple of times where you think you're going to go kill it. You've got a you've got this great lineup of people or whatever it happens to be, and something doesn't go well. And, it is magnified today where, a lot of TA teams have been, laid off. If we see it, if you on LinkedIn, a lot of people have little green banners, and it's up there a lot. And there's two kind of pieces to that is like, how are we gonna get the work done? And then you've got you people that you really like that may think that you didn't like have their back, you weren't there, and it's a business. You have to make these decisions. And then there's the other component of the survivor syndrome of the people that are still on your team that you need to be front and center selling the organization, and they've kind of lost belief. And all these things are true across, from the FANG companies down to right. And as a leader, like, how do you still get the best out of those people and building cohesion to still go do really good work? There's not a it's no different than like fixing performance. Now you're fixing belief, which in our world, if you're not behind what you're talking about or selling, because the sniff test is really strong around truth and authenticity that you both, Abi and Cody, talked about. Like, candidates see it. If you're just selling something, it's sort of like the car scenario. Do you believe it or do you love it? And there's a difference. And so your team has to, be behind that as well. And I think it's really this, the last year has really challenged different muscles with us in the same way as performance. Is like, how do you raise people up to lead in a really different way when you've got headwinds coming at you? And it's been a learn. I've been at this a really long time, and there's been some different things here that I think that I and others have experienced this past year, in terms of how to both get the work done and how we're going to get it done with the people that we have. That it might be the right people, but we have to think differently about it. And our jobs as leaders may have changed as well. Like, we may be significantly more in the details than we have been for a minute, and that requires a rethink. Like, am I above it? Do I think I'm too good for it? Like, do I know how to do it anymore? Do I have the expertise to lead some of these things? And the answer to that in my case is no, I don't, which requires me to have that kind of that bottoms up sort of leaders eat last type of mentality, which means I need the team for me to be successful. They need me to do other things so they're successful. And I think that builds that trust that we started about earlier. And so that's the way that the approach that we've taken this past year.
I think that was, if Sean was interviewing for a job, he would have nailed the job on that last comment, strictly because he said, I can flex up and down. It's like that extreme adaptability, being able to lean in. So that means Sean's a great leader, right? By seeing that ability to flex down, you're in the weeds and you're very granular, but you're also able to flex up. Like, that is a huge, that's a big indicator, I think, to me, when you're talking to individuals, to be able to see that. The individuals I've seen who have been in talent leadership roles, VPs of talent, directors of talent, whatever it might be, they say, oh, I don't do that. Or like, oh, I don't know how to do that. Oh, this isn't my capability. Where it's like, hey, I'm going to roll up my sleeves. We're going to figure this out together. We're going to pull in John from this team, and he's going to help us get there. So I think that's really interesting, Sean. That's a great answer.
I think the balance to that I'll say, I agree with everything that you said, but the balance there is, and I think it also depends on the type of company and the situation that you're in. But when we were in absolute growth mode, hiring 200 folks a quarter, I had to surround myself with expertise that I did not have, and I had to be able to trust them and rely on them. And at that moment in time, I could not have oscillated up and down, at least in that domain. Recruiting certain domains, yes, absolutely. We hired somebody who is responsible for our employer brand and recruitment marketing. For the first year, I was very much so still figuring that out. And coming back to vulnerability in that hiring process, I think that's honestly what allowed us to get such a star in that role, is because part of it was I was vulnerable in not knowing, and why we were kind of complementing my skill set and the autonomy that would come from that. And we've got a really good working relationship now because of that. Now, as kind of the macroeconomic climate has shifted, she's still a rock star in her role, but I can get a little bit closer to it because we've got less going on compared to hiring 200 people a quarter. We've got more of the details. We've got more into the throes together, which has been great for my own learning as well. But it kind of depends on that domain. And I think, coming back to the original point, a great leader has to know where they need to complement themselves, where they're needed by their business as a whole to spend their time. And oftentimes that's also why they were put into the role in the first place. If you're excellent at this and you're selected to be the leader, that's sometimes indicative of what the organization needs to see from you, and everything else can be rounded out too. So
yeah, it's a really interesting point. And I think as well, to what you were saying, Sean, in terms of the past year, the dynamic and makeup of a lot of teams has changed a lot. So it's a tough time, I think, for leaders out there, and that piece around, the people who are left in the organization. Maybe we can just touch upon that slightly in terms of, how do you start to really rebuild a team that has been, impacted by redundancies, and, like you said, you've got people who kind of, it's like that survivor's guilt. They've, lost colleagues, they've lost friends. Maybe their roles are a little bit different as well, because we know, this is what happens. A non-tech recruiter might be a tech recruiter now. And that's quite a difficult place sometimes to be in as a leader. Any kind of thoughts or advice for anyone who may be tuned in who is going through that at the moment as a leader?
I think a couple of different things. I'm going to keep pulling that theme of vulnerability through. You need to show up strong for your team to inspire and to help them see the direction and to kind of help people manage through that change curve or whatever kind of change management philosophy you identify with. And so you have to be there to A, give them space for where they are and to kind of work through that, but B, help pull them along. And I think through displaying some of your own vulnerability in those moments, it gives people the space to cope and to kind of go through that themselves, which, call it psychological safety or whatever you may, but it gives people kind of that need to kind of express their feelings, express where they are. It helps manage your expectations of where they are on that kind of change continuum. But then coming out on the other side of it is really important, where the vision comes together, the why, like what you're looking forward to in the next 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, whatever that kind of continuum may be. You've got to have something that, as people are coping with the loss or the change or whatever you want to call it, there's something to latch onto and to get excited about. Back to Sean's point, you can't just be selling something. You have to believe in it. It has to show up authentically, or it's not going to work. And that's where your job as a leader is to know where your team is, know where the company needs to go, figure out that vision, and then help bring them along to help them kind of cope with that survivor's guilt, because it's very real. But at the end of the day, there is still, no matter if you're a team of 2 or a team of 20 or a team of 200, there's still a lot of opportunity and a lot of needs to go and build. You've just got to get people connected to that vision and why.
Yeah.
I think it's definitely critical to keep them to know what they want, right? What do you want in this time? We talk a lot about engagement right now? I don't know if it's the same, Sean and Cody, for your guys' teams, but engagement is a questionable topic right now. How engaged are you with your manager? How engaged are you with the company that you're currently working for? And how do you know what the team wants and then give them that? So a lot of what I'm hearing now is that the team wants to do their job. They want to do their job well because they know it's a tough time. It's a tough market. And then they want time to enjoy their families, right? It's more of like this high stress environment right now, which is hard to get away from. And so I've seen my managers actually giving individuals a lot of flexibility around that. There's an individual that wanted to go kayaking with his daughter at noon for his lunch break. And I was told my manager, like, yeah, let him do that. Like whatever he wants to do to keep him engaged throughout that, right? If they're enjoying that flexibility in these, turbulent times, like give them that. If that makes him feel refreshed and rejuvenated and, oh, my lead is letting me do this great thing in the middle of the day, it's keeping them kind of engaged in a roundabout way,
I think what's interesting is so all the terms that have become popularized, hybrid working, remote working, everything, is new to some companies. I like, it's kind of like all I've known for the past 20, 25 years. And so as these have become like, do we do this or do that? I guess I kind of thought it was more normal than it was, just because of the nature of the way my teams have been built. And it wasn't necessarily me. It's like we were building global teams and leadership was in one place. And so people were dispersed, and it kind of is what it was. And so the flexibility and the trust that I think you afford teams, people see that over time. Like, does Cody and Abby, do they have my back as an employee? Do they trust that I'm going to get the work done, whether I'm working 100 hours or 50 hours? Do I have the resources and the tools and to get my work done and that sort of thing? And so when these times like this happen, hopefully they've seen consistency, with you as a leader in the organization. To be able to know that you'll be, there for them. I will say that emotions can ride high, and And we went through a redundancy situation many years ago, and it was actually with my European team, and not at Imperity. And we had I share this because this is this challenge with developing people, leading people, managing the process, and the headwinds that come with business needs. And so, we were affecting a number of people's roles. Kelly, as you'll know, in the UK, a certain number of roles that are affected within an organization, you go into collective consultation, and that's what happened across a number of my countries, but specifically in the UK. And I remember one of my employees challenging me in the office, saying that I didn't care about the culture. I've never believed in the credo of the organization. I was actually part of the 4 people that wrote the credo, and it stung. I had hired this person, believed in them from the time they were very young, over 10 years with me, and it took a while for them to come back to me, and it was a year. And they stayed with us. They were more dealing with the survivors piece. But he came back to me and he goes, "You know what? I was wrong, and I'm hoping that I can come back to your core team," because I had changed roles. And we brought him in, and thankfully, it is about 8-9 years later, and he's thriving and doing this amazing work, leading employer brand for Europe for that organization. But I had to stay the course because I had something I had to do for the business. I was very purposeful. I also knew what my responsibility was, as well as I'm going to be consistent and be a listener. It's hard. But I will say that there are times that the decisions that you have to make require explanation. And that doesn't mean there's going to be understanding. And that's tricky because, at the end of the day, we have a fiduciary responsibility to the organizations that we're a part of, and a caring responsibility, and hopefully a developmental responsibility with our team. My passion in my role is not filling jobs, is developing people and having people come thrive at the organization, starting with the teams that I'm responsible for, but hopefully within the company as well, that they come learn, grow, develop, and stay. Institutional knowledge stays here as well. And so these things aren't always easy, but they require purpose and intention.
And I think that piece kind of also looks at the different way of work at the moment. We've kind of spoke about hybrid, remote, in office, and as leaders, when it comes to that communication piece, because I think a lot of folks are managing hybrid teams at the moment, especially if you work in an international role. How can we actually best communicate with teams when we've actually got time zones, geographies, different working styles? I'd love to hear your kind of thoughts on that. I'll go with you, Cody, for this one.
Yeah, I think it's a couple things. First and foremost, as you're stepping into a role as a leader, you need to be a bit introspective to understand what your needs are. Because I think if you just start, asking a ton of questions and diving into things, it can be intimidating. It can feel like micromanagement. And you need to be really aware of what you need to be in the loop of, where you can delegate decisions, what decisions you need to be a part of, so that you can allow your team to thrive. And so I think step one is really just kind of being introspective with yourself. Step two, Abby, you mentioned it with the person who wanted to go kayaking with his daughter at noon. You need to know what everybody else needs as well. And you've got to be able to adjust your style to their needs. And this is where they come together. You need to also be able to communicate your needs, because if you know what somebody needs and how you can go lead them that way, communicate to them what their preferences are. Do they like Slack? Do they like email? If you pick up the phone and just randomly call them, are they terrified? Or would they rather just have a conversation and work through it? And just because it's their preference doesn't always mean necessarily it's right. Sometimes there are things that require some urgency where maybe that phone call is the right thing. It's also your job as a leader to explain, hey, if I'm calling you at 4 o'clock on a Friday, that's not a bad thing. I may just have a quick question. It's okay. It should be totally normal to pick up the phone and ring somebody. And I think that people come with their own trauma, scar tissue, whatever that is. It's your role as a leader to understand that and to some degree help unpick that so that you can effectively communicate. So I think it's, understand where people are, help meet in the middle of your needs, explain what your needs are, and then just kind of manage everything accordingly so that you can find that harmony. It's not always going to look like you expected it to when you set out, but it will kind of evolve and find its footing over time. And then the last thing I'll say that's most important is ask for feedback. Like, hey, I called you this day. Did that work for you? Did that set you off? Being able to receive that feedback, even if the feedback is no feedback, that's totally fine. The more you ask for feedback, the more you're going to start organically getting it too.
I think it's interesting too, because Cody touched on a little bit of empowerment, right? Because we have these managers and these leads, and I have a relatively green leadership team or management team underneath me, and they prior did not feel the empowerment to be able to have some of these communications with their direct team. And so giving them the ability to actually talk to their team and have these direct conversations with them and keep them in the loop of things has really changed that dynamic for them. Specifically is because that they can have communications that actually lead to results rather than just having communications to have communications. Hey, let's have a Monday morning or everyday meetup at 8 a.m. Let's have a standing meeting. Are we actually talking about anything? Are we accomplishing anything? Like, what is the purpose of this? And so giving them more empowerment to actually have real conversations with their team in those communications has been really helpful. And we've shortened them, and had one meeting a week or 2 meetings a week, NCAPs or whatever that might be, rather than meeting every single day to just go through the motions, essentially.
Yeah, and if I can just put a pin on Cody, what you said as well. I think it goes without saying, but nobody called it out until you said that. Is when you're leading, you have to ask for feedback all the time. The truth is, a lot of people don't feel the comfort. Today's world, I think feedback is going up more than it used to, which is a good thing. Because I remember when it didn't, it was more of a top-down approach, and today, it's up, down, sideways, and everything. But I think you also have to invite that, and an invitation without, a consequence. It's invitation to say, like, I want to listen and learn, and hopefully that's, coming when you're taking a new role. You've been in the role for many years. It's like, what's working, what isn't working, what do you like, what don't you like, why is that, and really be curious without being willing to fill space. So I think that's important, and so I completely agree with that.
Amazing. Some really great insight there, and I think it's quite a nice way to start to close the conversation as well. So we will head to Q&A really soon. So there's a few questions in the comments, which is amazing. But if there's anything for our viewers of you who've been listening that you would like to ask, please do pop it in the comments. One of the things that I'd love to ask before we do head there is, what can someone who is watching this at the moment, if they're looking to really kind of start to influence their team, are there any kind of quick tips, takeaways, maybe something that they can start doing tomorrow that can actually help to influence their teams? Abi, I'll go to you for this one because you look like you're thinking of something there.
I just think it's just this topic is it's a big topic to cover in an hour, and there's a lot of pieces that stem from it that all integrate together. So I was just thinking about all the different pieces and what I've told my leaders as well, or my managers as well, and how to become great leaders. I think listening, like we said early on, I think Sean touched on the listening piece, paying attention to the little cues. I know as recruiters, we're always taught you want to listen to the things that are said and what's not said. If someone's telling you, hey, my motivation is I want to work with new technologies and the latest and greatest, but they keep mentioning salary or they keep mentioning remote, you want to pay attention to those cues. So it's the exact same thing when you're managing or trying to become a great leader. You want to listen to those little cues. If they're saying, their body language and their videos are more, sad, they're not really paying attention to the camera, they're like looking away, like what's going on, like dig into what those things are happening. So I think pay attention to those cues. I know we're all remote now. A lot of us are remote, a lot are going back to work, but pay attention to those little cues that people are doing. Hey, I noticed in the meeting you didn't speak up very much. Like, what do you have going on? Some of those little things that you pay attention to really go a long ways. I know early in my career, there were individuals who said, oh, my wife and I are celebrating our 15th wedding anniversary. So you send them a card or something small, like those little like bids, if you will, I think really help build that communication and that trust, and they relate to individuals, you know, going to battle for you and dealing with a lot. So I think that's really critical.
I'll give 2 or 3 quick hits on that one. I think one, make time for yourself to step back and see the forest from the trees. It's really easy, especially as you're becoming a leader, to get pulled right down to that management category. And there's no pro or con from either, but you can't form a vision and you can't tell the story from that vision unless you back up and just kind of gain some perspective. And so I think that's actually, it's really uncomfortable to do, because you're basically saying, hey, let me take some time to step away from my work and think about things. And that's just weird, especially like in the climate where you're like, I need to be executing, I need to be delivering products or solutions or whatever that is. Make that time. I think it will be really impactful for your growth. And along with that, read as much as you possibly can. It seems so silly to say, but it will give you more perspective as you're doing that. The other thing that I would say is, you know, as a leader by nature, Sean, you kind of mentioned feedback is now going up. That also comes with, you'll start to hear all the problems. So all the problems will come up as well. If you are not already thinking of solutions and trying to remain like an optimistic business outlook, looking for positivity, looking for solutions, being a leader is going to be really hard. And so if you find yourself going negative or having that kind of pessimistic viewpoint, catch it, challenge it, look for solutions. That optimism, I think, will really help you. Yeah, I think I won't go for 3. Those are my 2 quick hits.
I agree with all that. So I'm not a big reader with business books in particular, but there's a couple that have stood out to me over the years. I'm much more of an experience, 70-20-10 rule. Like I learned through experience. It's who I am. It's how I work. The creative in me, I do play those guitars, as to your question earlier. But there's a book, if you haven't read it, Leaders Eat Last, Simon Sinek. It's the whole concept of the military and how the leaders eat and do everything after the troops, so that they're nourished, they've got the tools, they feel empowered, they feel listened to, and so forth. And it's a premise by which I was probably unintentionally operating, because I had people demonstrating that in my life and in my, you know, in the leadership experiences that I had. And so that kind of, and then I love this little book. I've had it on my desk for probably 20 years called Everyone Leaves. And the little quote, Abby, that you talked about is actually in this book. And there's a piece in there that has friction. And it's we hear this quote often: if you're not enjoying the journey, you're not going to enjoy the destination. And this piece that you have to be able to love what you're doing today and not just be looking at the next piece, because if you are, it will feel very selfish and you will lose your team very quickly. But the only thing I would add is, like, you can read all this stuff, get a mentor that's going to help you get feedback in the moment, tell you the truth, put the mirror up in front of your face, and also be able to say, like, I don't know what to do right now. You know, with these sort of situations, I'm coming into new territory. We're doing layoffs. We're hiring 10X, whatever it happens to be, and that somebody in and out or out of your organization might be helpful to you. That's what I would say.
Amazing. And then we've got a question come through from Prachi as well. And this relates back to our conversation around vulnerability. And they've asked, what if being vulnerable gives an impression of being weak?
Yeah. So what I would say there is, vulnerability is a tool in the toolkit. And I don't want that statement to confuse, because vulnerability still needs to be authentic. Like, you can't just use it as a tool. If it's disingenuous, it doesn't work. You have to know at the right times when people need to see that vulnerability from you. And sometimes, you know, that's in situations where they're feeling a bit vulnerable themselves, and you need to kind of mirror that and open up. Sometimes you need to be vulnerable for your own growth, to kind of say places that you don't know and seek help from either peers or from leaders, but you can't be vulnerable all the time. You know, you've got to, in some places, show confidence, in some places show vision, in some places show certainty. So vulnerability is a tool to use, and I don't necessarily want to say sparingly. I wish I had like a formula for how often to go and use it. I think that would take away the authenticity of it, but it's there when you need it, and it's also going to be different in different environments. So the best thing I can say is test it. You need to know who you're testing it with and who you're using it with. Test it, see if the response works. If it does, great, learn from that. If it doesn't, great, learn from that. And if it doesn't, don't let that demotivate you either. Sometimes it's just about the right people and the right timing.
I would say, just to add on to that, is the level of vulnerability that you share. So the same thing, it's audiences, right? And then it's depending on who you're with. For example, if you're in a meeting and you try it and it doesn't work. I did this actually recently. I tried it. It did not work. The individuals were not prepared for the information that I shared with them. I thought we were at a level where we could have this type of conversation and have a real, transparent conversation. My leads were not prepared for that. It did not go over well. It was not received well. And so I learned from that. I mean, I learn every single day, right? So I think knowing the level at which they're prepared for that vulnerability or that piece of communication is also key in moving forward.
So vulnerability and being deliberate can definitely coexist, but I think I think that it builds credibility that when you have to make hard decisions, people understand, kind of what your mindset is. And hopefully they understand that sometimes you just have to do things that you don't necessarily want to do, but it's the role, it's the business condition, and these sorts of things as well. Authenticity matters in that, but also you have to choose, to Abby, your point, sometimes it's like what the level of oversharing can be dangerous. I think we've all probably lived those lessons personally and professionally, right? So for sure. And I just want to, just add something. So my dad just retired. He's 80. He just retired after teaching all around the world. And his motto, which I learned from a little kid, is every day's a school day. And I think that in our roles, we have to be learners and adjusters, all the time. And hopefully those are things that transfer over to our colleagues and our teams as well.
Amazing. Oh, we've just got time for one more question, but we'll have to answer it quite quickly. So this comes from George, who is wondering, for those trying to be better leaders and get into leadership or manager opportunities, could you share some practical ways, so maybe classes, skill building, other things outside of the day-to-day job training, of building that experience that you all utilized to get into the positions that you are in today? So maybe we'll just do like a very quick 1 or 2 liners if there's anything you can share here. Sean, I'll go to you first for this one.
Sure. So I would say what I said earlier, I would get a mentor coach that has either industry or leadership experience that you admire, that you're willing to hear the feedback that they are going to share with you. And then secondly, certain forums, whether it's this one or others, that have some type of expertise that you can learn from, where you can ask questions and hear the feedback, would be really helpful.
Amazing. And Abby, how about you?
I would definitely say ask your direct, say, hey, like have that conversation with them first and foremost. Hey, these are my goals, these are my aspirations. Your manager should probably already be having that in mind and what you're looking for. And then look inside your team, but then also look amongst other teams. Where is there an opportunity for me to help in these other organizations or other departments within my organization? And again, trial by error. You could ask, hey, can I take this on? I see we're doing X, Y, and Z, or take the initiative to say, we aren't doing X, Y, and Z. Can we try this? What do you think about this? Bring ideas and put yourself in a position or create the position that you want it to be.
Yeah, I'll just piggyback off that really quick. I love the question because I believe you're accountable for your own growth. And by the nature of the question, you're doing that. But I think you just have to be curious. Like Abby, to your point, if you want something, you kind of got to go get it to some degree. And hopefully your manager's helping you get there. And if you've communicated this with your manager, they should know. But what are the things that your manager's doing that you want to try? Why don't you just try and replicate that within your own kind of portfolio of work? Take it to them, get feedback. That's a really quick way to kind of learn by emulation, where you can start to kind of get your feet wet in some of that. It's a really silly thing, but before I came to Calibra, I did not know how to use Excel or Google Sheets. I use it every day. I am a power user. That was 7 years ago. I can't believe I'm saying this in a public forum. If I couldn't do that today, I would be dead in the water. And I know oftentimes as recruiters, you're thinking about execution, all this. Dig into data, learn some simple functions, be able to do that. If you want to be a leader, it is one of the most pivotal skills for you to kind of analyze and then pulling that theme of storytelling through that data. That's my advice.
That's great, Cody. I remember the best advice I ever got from someone who worked at Nordstrom when I was placing candidates at Nordstrom. He said, pull up a document, create a document where you write down all of the things that you're doing, everything you create, everything you've done or touched or what you want to do in the future. And then you have that to move forward. I have individuals or recruiters that started doing that, tracking data points that I was like, oh, I never even thought about those. These are great. These are great points. So doing that shows that initiative, and then bringing that to your leader can help you morph that into a different position.
Yeah, amazing advice. I feel like this is a conversation we actually could do a whole half day on. But thank you all so much for joining. Some really amazing conversations going on. I wanted to share next week's webinar. So same time, same place. We always do our webinars on Wednesdays. Next week is all around employee experience, particularly looking at onboarding and offboarding strategies, and we're going to chat a bit about actually parental leave and re-onboarding folks as well after leaves of absences or parental leave. So do join us then if you are available. For now, thank you all very much for being on our panel today. Really appreciate all the time that you've taken to chat to us, and for everyone for watching, thanks a million, and hopefully see you next week. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.